Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one. Steamboat, the legendary rodeo horse, was so untamable that it became a symbol of Wyoming. Its rearing silhouette still appears on state license plates and represents the spirit of the Wild West. In a saloon in Wyoming, cowboys shoot at a man's feet to force him to dance. The bartender, impatient, points a German Mauser directly at everyone's head. A typical night in the Wild West. Border hunters were essential figures in the westward expansion, providing meat, pelts, and knowledge of the land. They lived isolated for months, trading with trading posts and tribes. The Queen of Bandits, Belle Starr, appears armed and mounted on her horse after her release in 1886. Imprisoned for horse theft, she wore elegant dresses and always carried weapons. A man draws a gun at the White Dog Saloon in Fort Worth, 1898. Scenes like this inspired the formation of the Anti-Saloon League, the first modern lobbying group in the U.S., calling for alcohol prohibition. In 1885, Geronimo fled the San Carlos Reservation in Arizona with 38 Apaches. He crossed deserts into Mexico, facing thousands of soldiers. He surrendered a year later, ending the resistance. During that escape, 11-year-old Jimmy McKinn was captured in Arizona. After months living with the Apaches, he was rescued but cried upon leaving, wishing to stay with the tribe that had welcomed him. Between marked cards, whiskey mugs, and pistols on knees, this image depicts the tension of games in Wild West saloons. At the table, bluffing and gunpowder went hand in hand. Tilly Baldwin defied danger in rodeo shows, performing acrobatics while standing on a galloping horse. A fall could be fatal. The animal weighed around 800 pounds. The legendary Wild Bunch Gang poses in front of a saloon in a rare photo. Sitting to the right is Butch Cassidy. Standing, Harry Longbaugh, the famous Sundance Kid. The duo terrorized banks and railroads. At 60 years old, Annie Oakley still performed feats like this, shooting a coin balanced on her dog's head in the early 1920s. No trick, just pure skill. On horseback in the snow in Montana, two Apsaluki silently observe in front of a teepee. These nomadic people were masters of survival, even in the harshest winters of the Great Plains. The Pony Express station in St. Joseph, Missouri, was the starting point for messages headed to California. The horseback postal service crossed the country in up to 10 days, defying all terrain. The Pony Express riders were fast young men who rode up to 120 miles per shift. They faced daily dangers and changed horses at each station to maintain delivery speed. Here, we see a poster offering jobs for the Pony Express, seeking thin young men under 18 willing to risk their lives. Orphans were preferred. The pay was $25 per week. Two prostitutes pose in a brothel decorated in Miles, Montana. The town, with a population of 1,000, was known for having more saloons and brothels than churches, being demoralized and lawless. With pistols in one hand and a drink in the other, these men fought in the bloody Lincoln County War. A mix of bravado, alcohol, and gunpowder shaped the violent West of 1878. Butch Cassidy's gang posed for this photo in Fort Worth before a series of train and bank robberies. Ironically, the image was crucial for Pinkerton to identify and hunt them across the country. Mabel Hackney Tompkins impresses the audience by jumping with her horse Skyrocket over a table during a show in Ponca City. At the time, women riders were gaining attention in traveling arenas. Calamity Jane appears relaxed with friends in Gilt Edge, Montana in 1897. Known for challenging social norms, she was as famous for her exploits as for her indomitable personality. In Wyatt Earp's last photo, taken when he was elderly, he was living in California and advising Hollywood Western productions. He died in 1929, being the last survivor of the legendary gunfight at the OK Corral. Frank Hamer started as a Texas Ranger and became famous for leading the ambush that killed Bonnie and Clyde in 1934 after tracking the couple for over 3 months across 5 states. In addition to facing outlaws, Frank Hamer fought the Ku Klux Klan and stopped lynchings in several cities, firmly combating racial violence in the southern United States. Mary Fields was the first black woman to work for the United States Postal Service. She stood about 6 feet tall, smoked cigars, carried a rifle, and never let a delivery be late, even in snowstorms. Known as Stagecoach Mary, she drove her stage along the Montana routes. She earned respect for fending off armed robbers, wolves, and storms, and was the only woman allowed to drink in Cascade saloons. In the massive pine trees of eastern Salem, Oregon, a family poses in front of their cabin. Decades later, this entire forest would be cut down and the area converted into agricultural land. With a hat and rifle in hand, Pearl Hart robbed a stagecoach in Arizona in 1899. Disguised as a man, she became one of the few women to commit such a feat in the Wild West. After the crime, Pearl was arrested and taken to Yuma. In this 1899 photo, she is seen with the prison tag. She became famous, gave interviews, and was released a few years later for good behavior. Calamity Jane poses beside the grave of Wild Bill Hickok, with whom she claimed to have had a romance. Before she died, she expressed the desire to be buried next to him, a wish that was granted. In Lexington, Kentucky, a customer waits in the luxurious bell-braising brothel known for receiving politicians and businessmen. The services were expensive, and some rooms cost up to $10 per night. The streets of Tombstone, Arizona seemed calm in 1881, but in October they became the stage for the famous shootout at the OK Corral when the Earp brothers and Doc Holliday faced off against the outlaw cowboys. A year later, a fire destroyed the OK Corral, the scene of the legendary gunfight. Even in ruins, the site would become a symbol of the Wild West and one of the most remembered events of frontier history. A cowboy receives an impromptu haircut in front of a cabin in 1908. In the Wild West, without a barber nearby, any sharp knife and a willing friend solved the problem with courage. Cowboys gather around the campfire to hear stories told by the chief. The nights in the camps were moments to talk about storms, lost cattle, and dangerous encounters. A train moves along a winding trail beneath the Buckhorn Mountains in South Dakota, carrying settlers westward. Railroads helped create towns and transport supplies to isolated regions. A rare photo shows Billy the Kid playing cricket, revealing the everyday side behind the legend. Even as a fugitive, he participated in local social life during breaks between confrontations in New Mexico. In Skagway, around 1900, pioneers tried to train moose to carry loads along the trails. The idea seemed promising, but the moose soon proved too stubborn for transport. Naiche and Geronimo appear side by side at Fort Bowie in 1886. Shortly after, they would be sent as war prisoners to Florida. Both were leaders in resistance to the occupation of their territories. In a saloon around 1915, men played pool and cards in a typical Wild West setting where leisure and gambling mingled. A poster of Buffalo Bill is also seen hanging on the wall. Manhattan, Nevada, looks like a movie set, but it was real. A main street bustling with settlers, barrels, stores, and smoke. In the early 20th century, these centers grew rapidly with the advance of mining. In North Dakota, at the end of the 19th century, this farmhouse displays a common tradition, decorating the roof with elk skulls. It was a practical way to give personality to the home in the West. Pat Garrett became famous for killing Billy the Kid in 1881 in the New Mexico Territory. After being friends with the outlaw, he became the sheriff who hunted him down and entered history with a single shot. Saloons like this functioned as social hubs where whiskey was served stronger and cheaper than on the East Coast. Many establishments brewed their own drinks in the basement. The Buffalo Soldiers of the 10th Cavalry pose at Fort Apache in 1890. Composed of black men, they faced prejudice even while serving bravely on the most dangerous frontiers of the West. Many of the Buffalo Soldiers patrolled isolated regions, facing snow, attacks, and scarcity. Despite this, they maintained discipline and carried out missions that few would accept. Boss Reeves was a legendary deputy marshal in Indian Territory. Born to enslaved parents, he arrested more than 3,000 criminals and is considered one of the greatest lawmen of the Wild West. In this 1907 photo, Bass Reeves appears on the left alongside fellow lawmen. Despite the prejudice of the era, he stood out for his bravery, intelligence, and impeccable reputation. Hundreds of tents were organized to form a large military camp at Hiddenwood Creek. It was part of a reconnaissance mission by General Custer before the campaign against the Lakota. Deadwood grew rapidly after the discovery of gold in 1876, attracting fortune hunters, outlaws, and figures like Calamity Jane. It was chaotic, vibrant, and completely lawless. With a rifle in hand, a customer poses in front of Jackson's Bar in Idaho. Back then, bars and guns went hand in hand, and the risk of a brawl turning into a shootout was always high. In Colorado, a merchant tries to survive selling clothes and shoes amid rudimentary buildings. Many who came in search of gold ended up living from trade, mining, or cattle. The Tombstone Baseball Club, formed by miners, merchants, and even sheriffs, gathered ordinary men from different classes around baseball. The sport united rivals and gave a break from the chaos of the Wild West. Big Nose Kate, Doc Holliday's companion, was a strong and independent woman who also worked as a nurse and saloon owner. She was the only one to stay by Holliday's side until the end. A cowboy separates cattle at the Shoe Bar Ranch, Texas, in 1912. After the Wild West was divided by fences and private properties, many settlers became wealthy by creating herds to supply cities. Buffalo Bill poses alongside his troop at the 101 Ranch, Oklahoma. The venue became famous for its shows featuring cowboys, Native Americans, and theatrical tricks, mixing myth with spectacle for crowds. This photo shows 4 men playing cards, one of whom is supposedly Billy the Kid. The authenticity is debated, but if true, it would be a rare record of the outlaw in a relaxed moment. In Old Tascosa, Texas, cowboys gather at the saloon in 1907, showing off leather vests, fringe pants, and spurs. Typical attire to withstand the saddle and hard work. In Beeling's Saloon in Michigan, customers could play billiards under a pressed tin ceiling, a rare luxury at the time. In addition to drinks, the location was a center for clandestine betting during winter. Crazy Horse, the Lakota warrior leader, was the one who led the U.S. Army into a deadly ambush at the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, helping annihilate Custer's 7th Regiment. Many former slaves moved west after the Civil War in search of freedom and work on ranches. Most cowboys didn't own their own horses and borrowed them from their bosses. One of the rare photos of Wyatt Earp with his wife Josephine shows the couple in their old age at their Happy Days mine in Arizona, far from guns near the river, still in search of gold. In downtown Bingham, Utah, bars and saloons competed for space with churches and markets. Despite the state's religious reputation, the main street buzzed with drinks, business, and plenty of mud. Custer's expedition crossed the Dakota Territory with troops and wagons in search of wealth. Conducted in 1874, it led to the discovery of gold in the Black Hills and the breaking of treaties with the Lakotas. Comanche, the horse of the 7th Cavalry, was the only survivor of the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, where troops were decimated by Lakotas and Cheyennes. Wounded, he was cared for until his death. Pioneers of the Wild West have a meal next to an improvised cantina during the Pikes Peak Gold Rush. Thousands were drawn to Colorado in search of fortune in the slopes of the mountains. Tombstone was a bustling silver camp in 1881, with more than 100 saloons, brothels, and newspapers. Its population grew from 100 to about 7,000 people in just a few years. Boss Caswell's Monkey Saloon in Granite, Colorado, was famous for its cheap drinks. Frequented by miners, it was one of the liveliest and most dangerous spots in the region. In Castle Gate, families like this one lived near coal mines facing harsh conditions. Often, children worked from an early age to help with the family income. Soldiers from the 3rd Infantry of the United States practiced with rifles near Fort Meade. Founded in 1878, The fort helped protect settlers and stagecoach routes during the Western Expansion. Gathered around the fireplace, these men rest after work. And judging by the guns on the wall, it seems they were prepared to face any thief who dared to enter. Survivors of the Battle of Little Bighorn gathered in 1948, more than 70 years after defeating Custer. Their ceremonial clothes honored the memory of one of the most iconic battles in Indigenous Resistance. The legendary Calamity Jane became famous after guiding a caravan for 90 miles through hostile territory to Deadwood. She did this alone after the guide was killed, saving all the passengers. Men pushed forward through the Arizona desert, paving the way for a new railroad. Many of these lines were built by immigrants who endured grueling shifts under intense sun and harsh terrain. The peace officers of Dodge City formed an elite group that tried to impose order in a city overwhelmed by violence. Among them was Wyatt Earp, a central figure in the battle against crime in the Wild West. In Ole Elliott's Combination Saloon in Utah, bottles lined up next to wary glances. Between sips and silences, each customer seemed ready to either toast or draw. Settlers crowd a tent in California to bid for land at auction in 1904. Many bought based solely on ads without seeing the site, drawn by promises of fertile soil and new opportunities. In Dodge City, signs warned that carrying firearms was strictly prohibited. Contrary to the myth of constant gunfights, the town sought to maintain order with tough laws since its foundation. A furious crowd surrounds the jail in Guthrie, Oklahoma, demanding the release of a local prisoner. At the time, the town still lacked a formal government, but it already had organized rebellion. At J.W. Swart's barroom, a shot cost only 12.5 cents. In 1885, this type of saloon was a meeting place for miners, cowboys, and outsiders eager for rest and conversation. The Bob Saloon was a must-stop for cowboys and hunters in Miles City, Montana. Saloons like this served strong drinks, housed illegal games, and often also functioned as post offices. Between mud, snow, and raw wood, Clancy's Saloon welcomed exhausted miners during the gold rush in Alaska in 1897. It was where they warmed up, drank, and planned their next fortune. Texas Jack Jr., photographed around 1885, followed in the footsteps of the legendary Texas Jack. Besides performing in Buffalo Bill-style shows, he was the one who gave Will Rogers his first stage. In Randsburg, California, this miner lived in a house dug into the ground, made of stones and clay. During the gold rush, many dug homes like this to save wood and resist the heat. A cow takes 7 children to school in Okanogan, Washington in 1907. It was said this was the animal's daily task at a time when transportation was scarce in rural areas. Crossing Death Valley in the 1870s required courage and endurance. The long wagons pulled by 20 mules carried tons of borax under relentless sun in one of the country's most extreme climates. Washakie was one of the few indigenous leaders who sought peace with the whites without sacrificing his people's dignity. He signed treaties and secured land for the Shoshone in Wyoming. In 1909, the main street of Childress, Texas, was filled with wagons selling cotton, the South's white gold. These weekly fairs boosted the rural economy and attracted buyers from afar. Cavalry and infantry soldiers of the United States observed the Indian grass dance, a ritual symbolizing the hope for healing and resistance of native peoples during the most tense years of the reservations. A massive sand wall engulfs the town of Midland, Texas in 1894. These storms would cover homes in minutes, ruin crops, and force residents to hide for days inside their homes. At the Cosmopolitan Saloon in Telluride, Colorado, customers play roulette under heads mounted on the wall and imported wallpaper. It is said Butch Cassidy had a drink here before robbing the town's bank. On a remote ranch in Arizona in 1888, men killed time playing poker outdoors. In isolated areas, gambling was one of the few pastimes after long days of hard work. Guthrie's first blacksmith shop emerged during the land run when thousands occupied Oklahoma in 1889. In just one day, the city was founded and tools became essential for pioneers. Annie Oakley shows her mastery over the horse during a performance in 1890. Known for hitting flying coins in midair, she became an icon in Buffalo Bills shows and broke barriers. Millie Ringgold, an ex-slave, sought freedom in Montana. She worked as a prospector during the 1879 gold rush and later opened a boarding house in Yogo Creek, living independently. Cheyenne prisoners photographed after trying to escape the reservation in Kansas and return north. The journey became known as the Cheyenne Exodus, one of the most well-known native escapes of the 19th century. In 1876, Santa Barbara still looked like a dusty rural village. De la Guerra Street, seen from Anacapa, shows a rough scene, far from the tourist image of California today. Apache Kid was a scout for the U.S. Army before becoming a fugitive. Known for escaping all pursuits, his legend grew after he disappeared into the desert, being searched for decades. Doc Holliday, a trained dentist, became a gunslinger after contracting tuberculosis. He gained fame fighting alongside Wyatt Earp at the OK Corral and was feared for his sharpshooting and coldness in duels. Thousands of settlers pitched their tents during the Oklahoma land rush of 1889 when native lands were forcibly opened to those who arrived first. It is estimated that 50,000 people participated. Mining engineers and their wives hold an impromptu concert with banjos and violins in front of their tent. Many of these professionals came from the East, hired by large mining companies. Henry Heck Thomas was one of the most feared sheriffs of the Wild West. He was responsible for hunting down the Dalton brothers, helped weaken several gangs, and imposed law in the Indian Territory of Oklahoma. Cowboys gather for a drink after work in 1908. Many only worked during the cattle driving season or branding cattle, spending the rest of the year wandering through towns and saloons. Armed and ready, these Texas Rangers patrolled vast frontiers. Some took part in violent confrontations with cattle thieves and outlaws during the border wars. Laura Bullion, known as the Outlaw Girl, was part of Butch Cassidy's gang. She took part in the Great Northern Train robbery and was arrested in 1901 at the age of 25. The 7 chiefs of the Crow Nation gather in Montana in 1887. At the time, they sought to protect their land and rights amidst federal pressures for new concessions on native territory. This settler family lived in a tent in 3 Block Range, New Mexico, around 1908. Nomadic life was common among landless farmers seeking fertile land and opportunities. Indigenous chiefs gather in peace council after years of conflict with the U.S. Army. The agreements came after brutal military campaigns and forced relocation to reservations. In Humboldt County, California, hunters and travelers gather at the Table Bluff Hotel and Saloon. Many hunted animals, like bears and elk, were used for meat, hides, and saloon decorations. A family working in a mine on the slopes of Cripple Creek, Colorado, in 1893. The town would soon become the state's largest gold producer, attracting thousands in search of fortune. The Southern Paiutes, skilled in desert survival, demonstrate traditional techniques in this 1874 photo. They were known for making bows, hair braids, and nets from yucca and juniper fibers. Corinne emerged as a rebellious outpost in Utah, famous for challenging Mormon dominance. It was a vital point for railroad shipments and soon earned the nickname the most wicked town between Sodom and San Francisco. While one of the ranch cowboys observes, the cook tends the fire next to the supply wagon. Meals in the field were simple but sacred. Coffee, beans, and meat were enough. Cowboys from the Ox Ranch take a dinner break in the Texan wilderness. The supply wagon at the center served as a mobile kitchen and meeting point. Today, this place is the city of Childress. Known as Wrinkle Meat, Chief John Smith of the Chippewa tribe was one of America's oldest faces. It was said he was 138 years old, but he died of pneumonia in 1922, likely under 100. Prescott was the capital of the Arizona Territory in 1880, with wide streets and wooden buildings aligned toward the mountains. the town was marked by political disputes, crowded saloons, and constant fires. In the Orient Saloon in Bisbee, Arizona, men gamble on faro, the favorite game of Wild West saloons. Despite its popularity, it was banned in many states due to fraud and confusion. The first transcontinental railroad connected the east to the west of the United States in 1869. Built by thousands of immigrants, it reduced travel time from months to just a few days and accelerated the settlement of the West. Teddy Roosevelt poses in the Badlands of Dakota around 1885. After losing his wife, he exiled himself to the West, became a rancher and deputy sheriff, years before becoming the 26th President of the United States. In Pine Ridge, South Dakota, Oglala families set up their tents in front of the government-run Indian school. The scene shows the contrast between native life and state-imposed education. Hunters pose next to their cabin in Brown Basin, Arizona, in 1908. With pack mules and dogs, they hunted for meat and valuable pelts such as coyote, wolf, and cougar. Prospectors work with gold pans in the streams of Rockerville, Dakota, searching for gold. Many were veterans of the Civil War trying to start a new life during the gold rush in the Black Hills. In Rawhide, saloons, markets, and wagons crowd the main street at the height of the mining boom. Founded in 1906, it grew so quickly that it housed over 5,000 people in just 1 year. In 1888, residents of Deadwood parade down the main street to celebrate the arrival of the railroad. The rail connection boosted local trade, linking the mining town to the rest of the country. At the OR Ranch in Arizona, Irwin E. Smith serves breakfast by the campfire. A photographer and cowboy, he sensitively captured the daily life of cowboys before the Wild West disappeared. John Dunn enjoys coffee in front of his cabin and laundry in Missoula. A carpenter, he also documented frontier scenes with his camera, recording the hard daily life in the West. It is estimated that 1 in every 4 cowboys in the Wild West was black, as shown here in 1913. Many were former slaves who found rare respect and fair pay working on ranches. Accused of murder, Blue Duck poses next to Belle Starr, who visited him in prison. The 1886 photo reveals the strange alliance between 2 of the most controversial names in the Wild West. In Eureka, Colorado, gold and silver mining spurred the city's rapid growth. By 1900, the region had hotels, saloons, and a railroad that transported ore to Silverton. Cowboys take a break in the shade after hours in the pasture. Working on a ranch required up to 18 hours per day, dealing with cattle, fences, and dust. Even a can of tomatoes became a valuable meal midway through the day. A settler poses in front of the cabin he built alone in Perkins County, South Dakota. Many sought free land offered by the Homestead Act to start a life in the West. The busy Circle City Saloon welcomed miners and adventurers from the gold rush in Nome, Alaska. In the background is a steamship bringing supplies and passengers via the region's only viable route. Villa of Brule, pictured in 1891 near Pine Ridge, housed hundreds of Lakotas around White Clay Creek. This creek was also the site of tensions that preceded the Wounded Knee Massacre. In Humansville, Missouri, the concert band poses with instruments and costumes for a show in 1915. The group blended music, theater, and humor in performances that satirized life in the Wild West. At the foot of Nevada's mountains, the camp beside the tracks marked the advance of the Central Pacific Railroad. It marked the end of the line, but also the start of chaos, commerce, tents, and nights filled with alcohol. Creede was the last silver boom town in Colorado. In the early 1890s, its population exploded, attracting miners, saloons, and infamous criminals like Soapy Smith. John Hoffman's Saloon and Grocery was the classic 2-in-1. It sold everything from groceries to whiskey shots. Places like this saved time and avoided long trips for supplies. In the relentless heat of the Arizona desert, a cowboy stops to fill his barrel at a well. Meanwhile, his horse enjoys the rare break to cool off. It was April 5, 1907. Here, we see the inside of a teepee with beds, utensils, and objects organized in a circle. Teepees like this housed decisive meetings between Indigenous leaders and government representatives.